Types of air plants to grow indoors. The term of air plant refers to any of roughly 500 different species of flowering perennial plants in the Tillandsia genus, part of the bromeliad family. They require no soil for their roots. Instead, they extract moisture from the air. Plants of this type are known as epiphytes, including Spanish moss. In their natural element warm, arid regions where they do best under bright, filtered light air plants grow on trees, anchored to the bark. Although perennial in a sufficiently warm climate, they're often grown as indoor houseplants, where they thrive under fluorescent lighting. Although once rare in commercial use, air plants are now quite trendy and used in a variety of hanging garden applications. While a few species can be grown in pots, most are mounted on pieces of bark or driftwood and suspended in air. A hanging grid is also a popular display for air plants because it groups together a collection and provides good air circulation. Air plants are now widely available at garden centers. Some are quite diminutive and need to be seen up close to be fully appreciated. Although there are many species of Tillandsia, many don't have common names. Instead, they're simply lumped together as air plants or sky plants. Or they may be sold simply by species name. This is the gardening tips. Air plants are watered in a rather unique way, since most aren't grown in soil. Light misting 2 to 3 times a week will keep your plant hydrated. This is especially necessary in arid climates or in regions with dry winter air. When it begins to look parched, submerge the air plant overnight in the kitchen sink, and it will begin to thrive once more. If your air plant is in flower, lightly rinse it under running water, rather than submerging it, which can ruin the flowers. Argentea. Tillandsia fuchsii var. Garcilis. Formerly called Tillandsia argentea, the Argentea air plant has a bulbous base that's likened to a pincushion and long, extremely thin gray-green leaves. Tillandsia fuchsii var. Garcilis is a delicate plant that only gets about 5 to 6 inches high and remains 1 to 2 inches wide. Even the flashy orange-red inflorescence is dainty. Native area: Mexico, Guatemala, Cuba, Jamaica. Height: 5 to 6 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia xerographica. For an air plant, xerographica has unusually wide, flat gray-green leaves that curl like ribbons. Much thinner new leaves sprout from the center of the rosette, but the broad outer ones make a great contrast in a display with smaller air plants. Withholding water causes the leaves to curl attractively. Native area: Mexico, Central America. Height: 6 to 15 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light, will tolerate some direct sun. Pink quill plant. Tillandsia cyanea. It's easy to see why Tillandsia cyanea is called the pink quill plant. The pink bracts fan out like a feather, with purple flowers poking out the sides. Unlike most air plants, you can even grow this species in soil. However, it's perfectly happy without it, if given plenty of moisture. Native area: Ecuador. Height: 8 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Peach. Air plant Tillandsia capitata, peach. The thick leaves of Tillandsia capitata, peach, are surprisingly soft to the touch. They form a silver-green rosette that changes to a peachy pink hue as it gets ready to bloom. The peach coloring makes a striking contrast to the purple flower. The largest specimens are 5 to 8 inches high, although 2 to 3 inch plants are common. Native area: Mexico, Honduras, Cuba, Dominican Republic. Height: 2 to 8 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light, will tolerate full sun. Giant air plant, Tillandsia fasciculata. Unlike most air plants, Tillandsia fasciculata has multiple common names, including the giant air plant, quill leaf air plant, cardinal air plant, and wild pineapple. This is one of the most commonly grown air plants, and there are hundreds of variations and hybrids. The species has a red and green inflorescence that stays attractive for weeks. Native area: Mexico, Central America, West Indies, Northern South America. Height: up to 3 feet. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Ball moss, Tillandsia recurvata. Tillandsia recurvata goes by the common name small ball moss or ball moss. It has more of a nest shape, with a mass of slender, arching gray-green leaves and a tall lavender flower spike. This air plant often naturalizes in the southeastern United States, and it has the very peculiar habit of allowing its seeds to germinate while still in the seed pod. Thus, it's very easy to propagate. Native area: southeastern U.S., Central America, Chile to northern Argentina. Height: 2 to 6 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia ixioides, white star. White star is a genetic cross between Tillandsia ixioides and T. recurvifolia, however, it's much larger than either parent. The bracts are a rosy pink with flowers ranging from cream to yellow. The silver-gray leaves tend to curl, giving it a sense of movement. Native area: nursery hybrid, parent species are native to South America. Height: 6 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Maxima, sky plant Tillandsia ionantha, maxima, or huamelula. If you're in the market for an air plant that makes an impact, the Maxima, sky plant, also known as huamelula, is worth a look. It can handle stronger sun than most air plants and produces multiple flowers simultaneously. The leaves turn coral red before the plant blooms with brilliant purple flowers. This cultivar is considered relatively large for an air plant, reaching 5 to 6 inches in height with a spread of 3 to 4 inches. Native area: Mexico, Central America, South America. Height: 5 to 6 inches. Sun exposure: full sun to partial shade, does well under fluorescent light. Tillandsia stricta recurvifolia, cotton candy. Cotton candy is a hybrid of Tillandsia stricta and T. recurvifolia. It has long, thin, silvery leaves that look like a loose spider dahlia. It was bred for its striking pink flower spike. The bracts look as though they're inflated. This air plant variety needs very bright light to flower its best. Native area: nursery hybrid, parent species are native to South America. Height: 5 to 6 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia gardneri. Gardneri looks a bit like a small yucca, with pale grayish leaves that taper to a point. It's a larger air plant, growing up to 12 inches tall. This species would be a good choice if you can't provide the bright light and warm temperatures most air plants prefer. It's very forgiving but still needs plenty of moisture. Native area: Trinidad and Tobago, Colombia, Eastern Brazil, Venezuela. Height: 4 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia stricta, Pink bronze. With a typical pineapple-type rosette of leaves, pink bronze will develop a hint of pinky bronze coloring if placed in strong, bright light. But it's the huge pink and purple flowers that steal the show here. This air plant is popular as a single specimen in small teardrop terrariums. Native area: Trinidad and Tobago, South America. Height: 6 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Mad pupper: Tillandsia eranthos burgeri. Tillandsia eranthos burgeri, which we prefer to call by its fun common name, mad pupper, is one of the most popular air plants because of its vibrant flowers. It blooms reliably every spring with spiky pink and blue blossoms. This is a very low-maintenance species, and, like most air plant varieties, it prefers bright, indirect light or fluorescent light. Native area: South America. Height: 6 to 10 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light, does well under fluorescent light. Tillandsia flabellata. Instead of a rosette of slender leaves, Tillandsia flabellata grows tall and vase-shaped, with a spray of red flower spikes, sometimes described as a candelabra. As air plants go, the flabellata is quite large, growing up to 12 inches high. Native area: Mexico, Central America. Height: 6 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Sky plant: Tillandsia ionantha. Tillandsia ionantha, also known simply as the sky plant, is one of the most popular air plants. Dozens of cultivars are available, but the primary species is very popular, partly because it's extremely hardy and difficult to kill. The plant is quite attractive, too, with layers of silvery green leaves that deepen into shades of red and pink as they grow and extend. This color change happens right before the plant blooms with violet blossoms. Native area: Mexico, Central America, South America. Height: 6 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia brachycalis. The leaves of the brachycalis air plant fan outward from a central growing point, and the plant turns red as it gets ready to bloom. You may even find plants with leaves that have been dyed red to give the appearance of flowering. This is usually a fairly small plant, growing about 3 inches high with a 4-inch spread, though some cultivars are larger. One hybrid, Brachycalis X concolor, is bred to remain bright green. Native area: Mexico, Central America, Venezuela. Height: 2 to 8 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia funkiana. These elongated air plants bend and curl into odd shapes, sometimes even spiraling around themselves. Funkiana is a tiny species, growing only about 2 inches high, making it a great choice for a terrarium or a desktop plant. As with so many air plant varieties, the leaves will turn red as it gets ready to flower. The inflorescence is also red, with yellow flowers. Native area: Venezuela. Height: 1 to 2 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia loliacea. If miniature air plants fascinate you, loliacea is a real charmer. The plant itself never gets much larger than 1.5 inches high, but it reaches its flower stalk up another 2 to 3 inches to display equally tiny yellow flowers. These small air plants look equally appealing perched on wood or clustered in terrariums, where they can soak up excess moisture. Native area: Bolivia, Brazil, Argentina. Height: 1 to 3 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Druid, sky plant Tillandsia ionantha. With the renewed popularity of air plants, growers are focusing on more unusual colors. Unlike the red leaves of the species Tillandsia ionantha, the leaves of the Druid cultivar turn a peachy pink tone, and the flowers are white. This plant is usually quite tiny, but it's eye-catching nonetheless. Native area: Mexico, Central America, South America. Height: 2 to 4 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia cacticola. Cacticola is hard to find in cultivation because it doesn't produce many offsets. However, this air plant type is greatly valued for its lovely lavender flower. It has a silvery green rosette of leaves, out of which juts a long stem that holds the flower about 8 to 9 inches above the plant. The name refers to its habit of growing on cacti. Native area: Peru. Height: 3 to 9 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia diariana. With its bright orange inflorescence, diariana definitely has a tropical flair. The actual flowers are white, but they're upstaged by the exuberance of the bracts. This is one of the few air plant types that can also be grown in pots, where it can be better assured of receiving adequate moisture. When potted, it can grow rather large, 12 to 18 inches high. Be sure to give this air plant lots of humidity. Native area: Mexico, Central America, Ecuador. Height: 3 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia ionantha, Fuego. Tiny but quite the show-off, Fuego is a cultivar bred to keep on blushing long after blooming. The leaves retain their bright color for months. They're small plants, growing only about 1 inch high, but they do fill out quickly. This air plant type could be a focal point in your collection or a conversation starter on your tabletop. Native area: Mexico, Central America, South America. Height: 1/2 - 3 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia circinata. Thick silvery green leaves give Tillandsia circinata a very substantial appearance for an air plant, almost like a bulb of fennel. Circinata plants will flower in either yellow or purple and grow to 6 to 8 inches in height, although they're only about 1 inch across at their base. Native area: Mexico, Costa Rica, Bahamas. Height: 6 to 8 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light or partial shade. Tillandsia bulbosa. Tillandsia bulbosa derives its common name from its bulbous roots, but it's the contorted, narrow leaves that give it the most interest. Bulbous air plants are often described as looking like tentacles, and the leaves will change to purple or red, just before the plant is ready to bloom. When grown outdoors, Tillandsia bulbosa has a symbiotic relationship with ants. The bulbs are somewhat hollow, and the ants make their home inside them. In exchange, the plant feeds off the waste the ants leave behind. Native area: Southern Mexico, Central America, South America. Height: 4 to 7 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light or partial shade. Tillandsia didstica. Didstica is very large for a Tillandsia, growing upward of 1 foot high at maturity. The base of the plant forms an airy spray of slender, pointed, gray-green leaves. Out of them comes the flower stalk with pinkish bracts and small white flowers. A popular cultivar to check out is burnt fingers. Native area: Bolivia, Brazil. Height: 6 to 12 inches. Sun exposure: bright, indirect light. Tillandsia scaposa, Colby. Several air plants tend to grow sideways or snake in odd directions. Colby, which grows tall and upright in a tight cluster, resembles a bunch of celery. It's not a big plant but makes a statement with the soft gray fuzz on its leaves, especially when they blush pink before blooming. As with many air plant types, you may find this variety classified several different ways, including Tillandsia colby, T. scaposa, Colby, or T. inonanta var. Scaposa. Native area, Guatemala. Height, 2 to 5 inches. Sun exposure, bright, indirect light. If you like this video, please subscribe and share. Thanks for watching.